Have you ever looked at something on a shelf and thought, yeah, there's no way in hell I'm touching that? Not because it's ugly or it's expensive or anything like that, but because every instinct in your body is screaming, leave it the fuck alone. Well, today we're talking about one of the most infamous cursed objects in the world. A small, old wooden wine cabinet that's been blamed for nightmares, strange illnesses, shadow figures, and terrifying experiences by multiple people over the last 2 decades. It's known simply as the Dybbuk Box. Now, before we get into the story, I want to say this. Nobody has ever proven that this thing is actually haunted. There are skeptics who think it's all one elaborate hoax. And there's some believers who swear something evil is attached to it. And honestly, after reading everything I could find about this, I'm not sure what I believe. But whether it's paranormal or a really convincing urban legend, it's fascinating. My name is Tanner, and this is Tales from the Fairy, bringing you one of the most cursed objects in the world. Apparently, this is the Dybbuk Box. So, before we can talk about the Dybbuk box, we need to answer a very important question. What the hell is a Dybbuk? Because if you're anything like me, the first time you hear that word, you're probably thinking, is that like a Pokemon character or something? No, not even close. So I've done research on this. Wikipedia is probably one of my best places to go and get information like this. There's also some other really weird sites that I went to, which we'll dive into that a little bit later. So, according to Wikipedia, a Dybbuk is a figure from Jewish folklore. According to tradition, it's believed to be the restless spirit of a dead person that refuses to move on. Okay. Instead of finding peace after death, it clings to the living, sometimes attaching itself to a person rather than simply haunting a place. And that's actually where the name comes from. So the word Dybbuk comes from Hebrew root dabaik. I think I said that right. Dabaik? Yeah. Which means to cling or to stick. So literally, a Dybbuk is a spirit that's clinging to you like your high school girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever. And honestly, it's creepy enough without adding haunted boxes into the mix. Like, okay, so this thing is very attached to you. Kind of like the movie Obsession, the one with Willow. Like, I thought that was really good. So I really enjoyed it. But won't be making a wish like that, I'll tell you. Okay, so here's something I found really interesting. A lot of people, including me before I started researching this, assumed Dybbuks have been around since biblical times. But not exactly. The idea of a Dybbuk as we know it today doesn't actually appear in the Hebrew Bible. Instead, the stories became popular much later, especially during the 1500s, when Jewish mysticism known as Kabbalah. Hmm. There's a lot of words in this that I'm not so sure of. So correct me if I'm wrong, but Kabbalah was flourishing in places like Safed in what is now northern Israel. Hmm. Interesting. So now I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert on Kabbalah because before researching it I really never really even heard of it. So if I tried explaining centuries of Jewish mysticism in 10 minutes, someone would probably yell at me in the comments. Or just shut down my channel, probably. Okay, so here's the short version. Kabbalah explores the spiritual side of Judaism, questions about the soul, the afterlife, divine mysteries, and humanity's relationship with God. Within those traditions, some rabbis and scholars wrote about spirits that were believed to wander the earth after death. One of those spirits was the Dybbuk. So, according to the folklore, a Dybbuk wasn't just any ghost. It was often described as the soul of someone who had unfinished business, which I've heard that before, probably in the many, many horror movies that I've watched. I think one of them is Insidious, possibly. Maybe they say it in there. I'm not sure. Possibly, though. So, unfinished business, or committed serious sins, this says, or simply couldn't find peace after death. Rather than moving on, the spirit was said to attach itself to another living person. Almost like spiritual hitchhiking, in a way, if you will. Except your passenger is an angry dead guy, so not really ideal, I would say. Now here's where things get even stranger. In many of the old stories, the possessed person wasn't always aware something had happened. Some accounts describe sudden personality changes, speaking in voices they didn't recognize, knowing information they couldn't possibly know, or behaving completely unlike themselves. Today, there are obviously many medical and psychological explanations for behavior like that. Conditions that centuries ago would have been impossible to understand. And it's important to remember that. Back then, people didn't know about things like neurological disorders, psychosis, or many mental health conditions. So, experiences that seemed impossible often became part of religious or supernatural explanations. That doesn't make the stories any less fascinating, though. It just reminds us that people throughout history tried to explain extraordinary experiences using the knowledge they had at the time. Now, according to Jewish tradition, there was a way to remove a Dybbuk, an exorcism. But not the Hollywood version where somebody's head spins around and green pea soup starts flying across the room, which was such an iconic scene, I tell you. Oh, I remember when I first watched that movie. Scared the shit out of me, but I love that. So, no. This is traditional accounts describe respected rabbis performing prayers, blowing a shofar, which is a ram's horn used in Jewish ceremonies, and reciting sacred texts while calling on the spirit to leave peacefully. The goal wasn't to destroy the spirit, but rather to release it, to help it finally move on. And honestly, that's kind of beautiful. Instead of treating the spirit like an evil monster like we do in the movies, the tradition often viewed it as a lost soul that had become trapped. Now, fast forward a few hundred years, stories about Dybbuk spread through books, plays, movies, and eventually the internet. The most famous was probably the 1914 Yiddish play The Dybbuk, which introduced the legend to audiences far beyond Jewish communities. From there, the idea of the Dybbuk slowly entered popular culture. By the early 2000s, most people had never heard the word, until a small wooden wine cabinet appeared on eBay. And this is where it starts getting a little spooky. Its seller claimed the cabinet contained a Dybbuk. And overnight, one of the internet's most famous paranormal legends was born. So, now that we know what a Dybbuk is, let's talk about the object that made millions of people afraid to open a simple wooden box. Because the story of the Dybbuk Box starts with an estate sale, a Holocaust survivor, and one eBay listing that would change paranormal history forever. Okay, so let's go to the year 2003 when all this began. The internet is a completely different place at this time. Facebook doesn't exist yet, and YouTube is not a thing. People are still buying random crap off eBay because why not? And that's exactly where this story begins. Not in a haunted castle or an abandoned asylum, not deep in the woods. Nope. Just with a guy named Kevin Mannis. Okay, so Kevin owned a furniture refinishing business in Portland, Oregon. His job was basically restoring old furniture and antiques. So, estate sales, in a way, yeah? That was just another day at work. One day, Kevin attended an estate sale. The estate belonged to an elderly Jewish woman who had recently passed away. Now, according to Kevin's original story, she had survived the Holocaust before immigrating to the United States. Among the furniture was an old wooden wine cabinet. It was nothing flashy and nothing that screamed evil. Honestly, if you walk past it at an antique store today, you'd probably think, kind of ugly. Maybe worth $20? Maybe? But according to Kevin, something happened before he bought it. He claimed the woman's granddaughter pulled him aside, and she allegedly said something like, "You can't buy that cabinet." Kevin supposedly asked why, and that's when she told him her grandmother had always kept it shut. Always. Her grandmother believed something terrible lived inside of it, and she called it a Dybbuk box. Okay, so imagine hearing this shit while you're standing in someone's garage, at this estate sale. And whatever I'd be holding, I would just gently put it down and slowly go back to my car and wish everyone a beautiful afternoon. But not Kevin. No. He bought it anyway, because apparently common sense was on vacation that day. Dumbass. Okay. Now, here's where things get interesting. Years later, Kevin said that his conversation and several other details in his original story were fictional. Oh, okay. Good to know. He explained that he created parts of the backstory to make the eBay listing feel like an old-fashioned ghost story. That's a way to sell it. So, right from the beginning, we're already dealing with something that's part history, part folklore, and part admitted creative storytelling. Keep that in the back of your mind. Because whether you believe the paranormal claims or not, that twist changes how you look at everything that follows. So, Kevin takes this cabinet home. Curiosity gets the better of him, and he opens it. If you ever seen The Possession, you already know, this shit's gonna hit the fan real quick. Okay, so inside, he reportedly found several unusual items. 2 old pennies, a lock of blonde hair, a lock of dark hair, a dried rosebud, a small granite statue, a golden wine cup, and a pair of old brass candlesticks. Now, none of those objects are creepy. If anything, it sounds like someone emptied out their junk drawer. But together, it's definitely pretty odd. People immediately started wondering if those objects had some kind of ritual purpose. Were they connected to Jewish mysticism? Did they seal something inside? Or were they simply keepsakes collected over a lifetime? The truth is, no one knows. And there isn't any evidence that the objects themselves were part of an authentic religious ritual. But still, the mystery only added fuel to the fire. Then, according to Kevin, things started happening. He claimed employees working in his shop suddenly noticed a strong smell. Not just any smell, cat urine. Ugh. Now, if you ever own a cat, you know exactly how awful that is. The smell has the supernatural ability to linger forever. He also described lights flickering, doors locking by themselves, and an overwhelming feeling that something wasn't right. Could there have been completely ordinary explanations? Absolutely. Old buildings have electrical problems. Antique furniture can trap moisture, mold, or odors. Our brains are also incredibly good at connecting random events once we think something is haunted. But Kevin believes something unusual was happening. And then came the nightmares. He said he began having vivid dreams about a terrifying old woman. Not just strange dreams, the kind that wake you up with your heart pounding. The kind where you generally relieved it wasn't real. At least you hope it wasn't. Kevin eventually decided he didn't want the cabinet anymore. So what do you do with something that you think might be haunted? Well, apparently you sell it online. To eBay we go. Because that's somebody else's problem now. And in 2003, Kevin listed the cabinet on eBay. His listing wasn't just a few pictures and price. It read like a horror story. He described the nightmares, the strange smells, the unsettling experiences. And he warned potential buyers that the cabinet might actually be cursed. Okay, so let's think about this for a second. Who is going to advertise something saying, hey, this might ruin your life, so just be a little cautious, you know? I mean, apparently it works because the listing exploded. People shared it across internet forums, paranormal websites picked it up, ghost hunters became fascinated, and almost overnight, the little wooden wine cabinet became known around the world as the Dybbuk Box. Now, whether the story is true or not, partially true or mostly fiction, it didn't seem to matter to anyone. Because something powerful had already happened. People believed it. And once an idea like that spreads, it takes on a life of its own. Now in this next part, we're going to follow the box as it passes from owner to owner. Because according to several of the people who bought it, the nightmares didn't stay with Kevin. They followed the box. So, Kevin sells the box. You'd think that's the end of it. Problem solved, haunted cabinet, gone. Sleep peacefully, never think about it again. Except that's not what happened. Instead, the stories only got stranger. One of the next owners claimed almost immediately that life started going downhill. Not in some dramatic Hollywood way, though, where chairs are flying across the room and demons are crawling across the ceiling. No. The experiences people described were much more subtle. And honestly, sometimes I think that's even creepier. Several owners claim they began having vivid nightmares. And here's the weird part. Some of them describe dreaming about the same old woman, an elderly woman with dark, sunken eyes, an angry expression. Sometimes she'd just stand there, watching. Other times, she'd attack them in the dream. Okay, so dreams are weird anyways, and I've told you two original stories that have came from my dreams. I had another dream the other night, which is going to become another original story on here, which I'm like, this one's going to go, yeah, it's going to be good. So, we've all had dreams that have made absolutely no sense, right? Right. I've had dreams where I'm late to work, or like somehow I'm riding a dolphin like through Walmart or some shit. You know, brains are strange, but when multiple people who didn't know each other began describing similar nightmares, you at least raise an eyebrow. Coincidence? Maybe. Suggestion? Also possible. Or is it something else? Another common story involved shadow figures. Several owners claimed they catch something moving out of the corner of their eye. A dark shape, standing in the doorway, crossing a hallway, disappearing the second they looked directly at it. Now, I don't know about you, but seeing something out of the corner of your eye is already creepy enough. You don't need a haunted cabinet helping you. Other people described sudden feelings of overwhelming dread. Not fear because they knew the story, just walking into the room where the cabinet was kept and immediately wanting to leave. Almost like every instinct in their body was saying, nope, don't do it. Some reported nausea. Others said they became dizzy. A few others have claimed that electronics started malfunctioning around the cabinet, like the lights flickering and batteries draining, phones acting strangely. Again, those things happen all the time, but once people connected them to the box, every little coincidence suddenly felt significant. Then there were the smells. This one comes up over and over and over again in numerous articles and websites I've gone to. Some people claim they smell jasmine flowers, even though there weren't any flowers nearby. Others reported the exact opposite: rotting flesh, decay, or the strong odor of cat urine. Now, why do so many people report similar odors? Nobody really knows. One of the most well-known owners was a museum curator named Jason Haxton. Jason became fascinated by the story and eventually bought the cabinet himself. Unlike some previous owners, he approached it almost like a researcher. He documented his experiences. He took photographs, and he interviewed previous owners. He later wrote an entire book called The Dybbuk Box about his investigation. And according to Jason, his health began declining while he owned it. He claimed he developed strange skin problems. He coughed up blood, experienced severe headaches, and dealt with constant exhaustion. Okay, so to be fair, Jason also had serious medical conditions at the time. So there's no evidence proving the cabinet caused any of this. But Jason himself believed the timing was more than coincidence. Eventually, he decided he needed to get rid of the box. Not because someone told him to, because he genuinely believed it was dangerous. And that brings us to probably the most famous owner of them all, Zak Bagans. And if you ever watch Ghost Adventures, you already know Zak has collected all kinds of allegedly haunted objects, such as dolls, paintings, clown statues. Basically, if something has a reputation of being cursed, Zak's like, I'll take two. So when he had the chance to acquire the Dybbuk Box, of course he did. Today, it's kept inside Zak Bagans' Haunted Museum in Las Vegas, locked inside a specially designed display. Visitors are warned not to touch it, not to provoke it, and in some cases, not even to stare too long at it. Now, whether that's a genuine concern or really good museum marketing, I'll let you decide that. Because let's be honest, if someone puts a sign that says, "Do not open this cabinet," what's the very first thing half the people walking in want to do? Exactly. Open the fucking cabinet. There have also been stories involving celebrities. One of the biggest names connected to the box is Post Malone. According to Zach Baggins, Post Malone visited the museum and came into contact with the Dybbuk Box. Not long afterward, Post experienced several pieces of incredibly bad luck. A private plane made an emergency landing. His former home was burglarized. He was involved in a serious car accident. Now, those events absolutely happened. Whether they had anything to do with the Dybbuk Box, well, that's where the belief comes in. Some say it's coincidence, others say it's a curse. Personally, if I had visited a haunted museum and then my plane had to make an emergency landing, I'd be side-eyeing the cabinet too. I'm just saying. Over the years, the legend continued growing. Every new owner, every new story, every strange coincidence added another layer to the mystery. But here's the thing. The more popular the Dybbuk Box became, the more investigators started asking a different question. Not, is the box haunted? But, is the story itself haunted by exaggeration? Because eventually, the man who started all of this made a confession, and it changed the entire legend. That's where we're headed next. Alright, so, we've talked about the folklore, we've talked about the box, we've talked about the nightmares, the strange smells, the shadow figures, Jason Haxton, Zach Baggins, and even Post Malone. But now we've got to talk about the elephant that's in the room. Because every good paranormal story deserves one question. What if none of this actually happened? Now, before anyone starts angrily typing a comment, hear me out. Back in 2021, Kevin Manis, the man who started the entire Dybbuk Box legend, gave an interview that completely changed how many people viewed the story. He admitted that much of the original backstory in his famous eBay listing was made up. Yep, the Holocaust survivor, the granddaughter warning him, several details surrounding the cabinet's mysterious history. Kevin said he created those elements because he wanted to write a really good ghost story. Well, buddy, you did. Mission accomplished there. Because here we are, more than 20 years later, still talking about it. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean Kevin never experienced anything strange. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Only Kevin knows. But if the foundation of the story was intentionally fictional, it forces us to ask another question. How much of everything that came afterwards was influenced by that story? So let's think about it. Imagine I handed you a plain wooden cabinet. I didn't tell you anything. You'd probably stick it under a corner and forget about it. Now imagine I tell you 5 people got sick after owning this. 3 people had nightmares. It might contain an evil spirit. Suddenly, every little creak in your house feels different. Every weird dream feels connected. Every shadow seems just a little darker. Our brains are incredibly good at finding patterns. Psychologists even have a name for it. It's called confirmation bias. So basically, once we expect something to happen, we start noticing anything that supports that belief. And we often ignore everything that doesn't. That's not being gullible, that's just being human. Another thing skeptics point out is that haunted objects become more famous every time someone tells a new story. Think about the movies. You watch a scary movie, you go home, and every little noise suddenly sounds suspicious. Your house has made those exact noises every night for years, but tonight it's definitely a demon. Or at least that's what your brain wants you to think. Now, none of this proves the Dybbuk Box isn't haunted. It simply shows there are perfectly reasonable explanations for many of the experiences people reported, whether it be stress or sleep paralysis, suggestion, coincidence, medical conditions, or just the power of expectation. But here's something I think that's really fascinating. Even after Kevin admitted making up large parts of the original story, people didn't stop believing. In fact, some people believed it even more, because they argued if the story was fake, how do you explain everyone else's experiences? And honestly, that's a fair question. Jason Haxton still believes something was unusual about the cabinet. Visitors to Zach Barga's haunted museum still claim they feel sick around it. Some employees have said they don't like being near it. Others refuse to interact with it altogether. Could all of that be a suggestion? Maybe. Could there be something we simply don't understand? Also, maybe. I think one of the biggest mistakes people make is believing that they have to pick one extreme or the other. Either it's definitely possessed or it's completely fake. Maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle. Maybe the cabinet itself is just an old wine cabinet, but the legend surrounding it has become something much bigger. Stories have power, beliefs have power, and fear has power. Whether that's supernatural or psychological depends on who you ask. And honestly, I I don't know. I've never stood in front of the Dybbuk box. I've never held it. I've never spent the night next to it. Would I? Hell no. No, absolutely not. Because here's the thing. Even if there's only a 1% chance that this thing is actually haunted, I'm not going to volunteer to find out. Some people skydive. Some people swim with sharks. Some people allegedly keep cursed antiques in their living room. I, myself, will happily stay home with Scooby, will watch our horror movies, and I'll let somebody else make those questionable life choices. Good luck with that. So, do I think the Dybbuk box contains an ancient spirit? I I honestly don't know. Do I think Kevin Mannis created one of the greatest paranormal legends of the internet age? Absolutely. Whether it started as fiction, fact, or something in between, the Dybbuk box has become a modern campfire story. One that's still being debated, still being investigated, and still making people think twice before buying weird antiques off eBay. And maybe that's the real curse. Not the box itself, but the idea. Because once a story gets inside your head, it has a funny way of sticking around, kind of like a Dybbuk. If you enjoyed today's episode, I'd love to hear what you think. Do you believe the Dybbuk box is genuinely haunted? Do you think it's one of the greatest internet hoaxes ever created? Or do you think the truth lies somewhere in between? Leave a comment over on YouTube or Spotify and let me know. I read every one of them and I love seeing the debates you all would get into. If you enjoyed hanging out with me today, don't forget to follow the podcast, subscribe on YouTube, and share Tales from the Fairy with someone who loves creepy stories as much as you do. So until next time, my fairy cult, sleep well, don't buy suspicious antiques from strangers, and remember, not every box is haunted, but if somebody tells you, whatever you do, don't open it, maybe, just maybe, listen.
Ayúdanos, gente, caí, te pasión. Mas lenta nos del mai. Amén.